end of the Summa Theologia. We're right about the midway point in this treatise on the Passions, which is questions 22 through 48. Well, now we're in 35. And this is a pretty big treatise, and I think it really highlights the fact that St. Thomas Aquinas takes the Passions seriously for a couple of reasons, I think. Well, first of all, they are common to all creatures other than the angels, right? Even the irrational animals have passions, and we certainly do. And I think also he wants to highlight the fact that they do play into the big picture, because everything that we do and every action and everything that happens to us has implications for our final end. And in this one, interestingly, he lumps pain and sorrow together. So question 35 has 8 articles, and I'm going to go pretty quickly through the first 7. Now, the 8th one I find interesting because he talks about the 4 kinds of sorrow, which is my favorite article of this group, but they're all interesting. But there are a lot, and so we'll try to get through this as quickly as possible. Pain and sorrow he links together because of their connection with each other, but also they are different as well. So Article 1, whether pain is a passion of the soul. And I remember when he talked about passions, there were the 2 types, the concupiscible passions, and there were 6 of them, and then the irascible passions or irascible powers of the soul, and there were 5 of those for 11 total passions. And so now that wasn't an exhaustive list of all the passions, but those were the 11 primary passions of the soul. So now he's saying, is pain of the passion of the soul? And with this, as this picture indicates, I think he's talking primarily about physical pain, which, of course, we all have experienced from time to time. He says every movement of the sensitive appetite is called a passion, and especially those which tend to some defect, which, of course, pain certainly would. Consequently, pain, according as it is in the sensitive appetite, is most properly called a passion of the soul, just as bodily ailments are properly called passions of the body. And then he talks about Augustine, reckons pain especially as being a kind of ailment. All right, so pain is a passion of the soul. Article 2, whether sorrow is the same as pain. And I think you probably can figure out that if you're sorrowful about something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're feeling physical pain, but like in this picture where it looks like, somebody's being comforted, maybe they're at a funeral, somebody has died. Sorrow tends to have more to do with like a cognitive, higher level pain than just something that is a physical, like a toothache or a headache or something like that. Or you bruise your knee and you have pain. It's a little more than that. And so he says, pleasure and pain can arise from a twofold apprehension, namely from the apprehension of an exterior sense and from the interior apprehension of the intellect or of the imagination. Okay, so he's making a distinction here between exterior and interior. Now, the interior apprehension extends to more objects than the exterior apprehension, because whatever things come under the exterior apprehension come under the interior, but not conversely. Okay, so if you get the headache, that's going to have not only a physical ache, but it's also going to affect you, your intellect, your even beyond the physicality of it. It's going to affect you. Whereas the opposite isn't necessarily true, where this lady mourning the loss of a loved one doesn't necessarily mean that she's going to have physical pain because of that, but there's an interior pain that is broader, that Thomas is saying. Consequently, that pleasure alone, which is caused by an interior apprehension, is called joy, and in a like manner, that pain alone, which is caused by an interior apprehension, is called sorrow. So sorrow is interior, joy is interior, whereas pain is exterior. And just as the pleasure which is caused by an exterior apprehension is called pleasure but not joy, so too that pain which is caused by an exterior apprehension is called pain indeed, but not sorrow. Accordingly, sorrow is a species of pain, as joy is a species of pleasure. Okay, I think that makes sense. Article 3, whether sorrow or pain is contrary to pleasure. And yeah, okay, so he actually only has like one or two sentences here, but yeah, obviously sorrow or pain is contrary to pleasure, because when you're feeling either of those, you're not going to be feeling pleasure at the exact same time in the exact same way. Article 4, whether all sorrow is contrary to all pleasure. Now, this is a pretty long answer, but I'm just going to read the last part of it, where he says, sorrow and pleasure, being passions, are specified by their objects. Okay, so some of the objects of passions might be the good or evil or arduous good, like in the case of the irascibles, like hope and despair, right? According to their respective genera, they are contrary to one another, since one is a kind of pursuit, the other a kind of avoidance, which are to the appetite what affirmation and denial are to the intellect. So again, throughout the Summa, Thomas is making this comparison between the lower part of the soul and the higher, the intellect and the sensitive aspect of the soul, all parts of the soul, but different aspects. So he's doing that here as well. Consequently, sorrow and pleasure in respect of the same object are specifically contrary to one another, whereas sorrow and pleasure in respect of objects that are not contrary but disparate are not specifically contrary to one another, but are also disparate. For instance, okay, Thomas is good about using examples. Sorrow at the death of a friend and pleasure in contemplation, right? Those aren't really opposites, because they're very different types of sorrow and pleasure. If, however, those diverse objects be contrary to one another, then pleasure and sorrow are not only specifically contrary, but they also have a certain mutual fittingness and affinity, for instance, to rejoice in good or to sorrow for evil. Okay, those would be directly contrary to each other. Article 5, whether there is any sorrow contrary to the pleasure of contemplation. And he's going to come down here saying, let's see, the pleasure of contemplation can be understood in two ways. In one way, so that contemplation is the cause, but not the object of pleasure, and then pleasure is taken not in contemplating, but in the thing contemplated. Now, it is possible to contemplate something harmful and sorrowful, just as to contemplate something suitable and pleasant. Consequently, if the pleasure of contemplation be taken in this way, nothing hinders sorrow being contrary to the pleasure of contemplation. So in that way, there can be contraries. In another way, the pleasure of contemplation is understood so that contemplation is an object and cause, excuse me, as when one takes pleasure in the very act of contemplating, and thus, according to Gregory of Nyssa, no sorrow is contrary to that pleasure, which is about contemplation. So contemplation itself, as contemplation as we typically think of it, contemplating God or contemplating, awesome things, there really is no contrary. And then he says, it is evident that no sorrow is contrary to pleasure taken in the very act of contemplation, nor is any sorrow connected with it save accidentally. Okay, Article 6, whether sorrow is to be shunned more than pleasure is to be sought. This kind of goes to show you the interesting things that St. Thomas Aquinas has in his mind. He says, the desire for pleasure is of itself more eager than the shunning of sorrow. The reason of this is that the cause of pleasure is a suitable good, while the cause of pain or sorrow is an unsuitable evil. Now, it happens that a certain good is suitable without any repugnance at all, but it is not possible for any evil to be so unsuitable as to not be suitable in some way. Wherefore, pleasure can be entire and perfect, whereas sorrow is always partial. Isn't that interesting? So sorrow will always have some aspect of good, right? Whereas the pleasure may not have any evil in it. I think that's what he's saying. Therefore, desire for pleasure is naturally greater than the shunning of sorrow. Another reason is because the good, which is the object of pleasure, is sought for its own sake, whereas the evil, which is the object of sorrow, is to be shunned as being a privation of the good, and that which is by reason of itself is stronger than that which is by reason of something else. Now this again, this answer for Article 6 was really long, and I don't have time, and you probably don't either, to go through the whole thing, but I think that's the gist of it. Article 7 says whether outward pain is greater than interior sorrow. Okay, outward pain versus interior sorrow. This lady, obviously experiencing outward pain, could be accompanied by some inward sorrow. But he says inward pain is not only greater than outward pain, it is also more universal, since whatever is repugnant to the body can be repugnant to the interior appetite, and whatever is apprehended by sense may be apprehended by imagination and reason, but not conversely. Hence, in the passage quoted above, it is said expressly, sadness of the heart is every wound, because even the pains of outward wounds are comprised in the interior sorrows of the heart. Okay, so this lady with a pain might also be feeling something interiorly, like maybe because of the pain she can't go out with her friends, or something like that. All right, finally, Article 8, and I want to read this corpus in its entirety because I find it really interesting the way Thomas structures this. Whether there are only 4 species of sorrow. So first of all, he says it belongs to the notion of a species that it is something added to the genus. But a thing can be added to a genus in 2 ways. First is something belonging of itself to the genus and virtually contained therein. Thus, example 1, rational is added to animal. Such an addition makes a true species of a genus, as the philosopher says. Okay, so you're adding rational to animal, you're making it more specific. But secondly, a thing may be added to a genus that is, as it were, foreign to the notion conveyed by that genus. Thus, white or something of that kind may be added to animal. Such an addition does not make true species of the genus according to the usual sense in which we speak of genera and species. But sometimes a thing is said to be a species of a certain genus through having something foreign to that genus, indeed, but to which the notion of that genus is applicable. Thus, a live coal or a flame is said to be a species of fire because in each of them the nature of fire is applied to a foreign manner. Okay, in like manner, we speak of astronomy and perspective as being species of mathematics inasmuch as the principles of mathematics are applied to natural matter. Now, I read that paragraph because I think it helps you get into the mind of St. Thomas Aquinas, because he hasn't said anything about sorrow yet, right? He's going to say that in the next paragraph, but he's setting the stage and he's giving you examples. He's trying to say, okay, I'm about to tell you the 4 species of sorrow, but before I do that, let me tell you about how things are grouped, with a mathematics and astronomy and, all these different things, animal and rational animal. Again, he's just trying to make it easier for us to understand. Okay, so the last paragraph in this question. In accordance with this manner of speaking, the species of sorrow are reckoned by an application of the notion of sorrow to something foreign to it. This foreign matter may be taken on the part of the cause or the object, or of the effect. For the proper object of sorrow is one's own evil. Okay, so sorrow has to be personal. It has to be something about you, but he's going to say that there's different ways of looking at how things affect us. Hence, sorrow may be concerned for an object foreign to it either through one's being sorry for an evil that is not one's own, and thus we have pity, which is sorrow for another's evil considered, however, as one's own. So when we pity somebody, it's not our problem, but because it's their problem and we pity them, it becomes our sorrow. So it is personal, even though it has to do with somebody else. Okay, so that would be related to love. Or as through one's being sorry for something that is neither evil nor one's own, but another's good, considered, however, as one's own evil. And thus we have envy. Okay, so your coworker got the raise, your coworker got the promotion. That's a good for them, but since it makes you feel bad, it's an evil for you. It's sorrowful for you because something happened good to them, and that's the classic definition of the capital sin of envy, right? The proper effect of sorrow consists in a certain flight of the appetite. Wherefore, the foreign element of the effect of sorrow may be taken so as to affect the first part only by excluding flight, and thus we have anxiety. okay, which weighs on the mind so as to make escape seem impossible. Hence, it is also called perplexity. Okay, we all know what anxiety is. Okay, that's a type of sorrow. If, however, the mind be weighed down so much that even the limbs become motionless, this belongs to torpor. Then we have the foreign element affecting both, since there is neither flight nor is the effect in the appetite. And the reason why torpor especially is said to deprive one of speech is because of all the external movements. The voice is the best expression of the inward thought and desire, not only in men, but also in other animals. So torpor, I guess, is just when you're left unable to really do anything. You can't speak, you can't move, you're so anxious that you're just pretty much shut down, and I know some people certainly experience that. All right, well, thanks for hanging with me. That's the 8 articles of question 35 of pain and sorrow in itself as we continue this treatise on the passions. God bless you. Thanks for watching.